Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jason Colleen. I'm an Assistant Executive Director with the Department of Cannabis Regulation, and I oversee the department's licensing activities. And I will be working with our DCR communications team to kind of coordinate today's Q&A session. Before we jump into the Q&A session, I will be reviewing some information that we've recently shared with the Cannabis Regulation Commission, and I've updated the numbers to reflect current numbers. And we can jump right into that. Next slide, please. So one of the questions that frequently has been coming up is, why is it taking so long for services to be provided? Currently, DCR has a vacancy rate of 50%. 29 of our 58 authorized positions are filled. We've had 7 employees leave during calendar year 2022. We've been actively interviewing for multiple vacancies over the last several months. We've made several job offers. Unfortunately, 8 of those job offers have been declined. We did have 6 candidates accept job offers. So we will be onboarding 2 additional office trainees, 1 administrative clerk and 1 accounting clerk next month. We will be onboarding a public relations specialist to assist the social equity and communications team next month. We will be bringing on a new senior administrative clerk to assist with licensing related work, and 2 management analysts to support our policy and social equity teams will be brought on board in early August. On the licensing side, we do have 6 job offers pending for management assistants, which will be assisting in responding to email inquiries, telephone inquiries, and processing applications. If those staff are hired and they do accept their job offers, it will take a few months to get them trained, but we hope to begin to provide services more in alignment with the processing milestones and timeframes that are articulated in the ordinance. I do want to remind folks that when DCR's vacancy rate exceeds 20%, those processing deadlines and timelines are suspended, which is why it is taking more than the amount of time that is articulated in both the municipal code and the rules and regulations because of this vacancy rate. Next slide, please. Other licensing related updates. There are several licensing projects and system enhancements that we're working on. Folks may know that we stopped accepting new applications and modification requests on Wednesday. We are pushing out several updates this weekend to the system. We will be bringing the DCR licensing portal down tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. and then we will bring it back up sometime on Monday. During the system maintenance period, folks will still be able to submit social equity individual applicant eligibility verification request forms because that service is not hosted through the DCR licensing portal, so that will not be affected. Records that we will be pushing into the production environment this weekend include the legal entity record, updates to the modification request record, temporary approval applications, and the annual application process. For folks that have existing records within our system, we will begin migrating them to the new record workflow types beginning Friday. And then hopefully the migration will be completed and verified by Monday morning. So that is why the system is going down. Once the legal entity record has been created, existing licensees will be able to create their legal entity record, which will streamline the renewal process as well as reduce the number of documents that have to be submitted during the renewal process. Additionally, for folks that don't have application records submitted, this will give them the opportunity to create a record for their legal business entity, and if applicable, request equity share review prior to submitting a pre-application or temporary approval application. Of course, if the legal entity is vetted and determined to be a social equity applicant, that will enable the business to apply for license types that are limited to social equity individual applicants, and it will streamline the temporary approval process because DCR will not have to complete the equity share review as part of that temporary approval process. This legal entity record will also facilitate a streamlining of the temporary approval application process for all applicants, because we will be vetting the entity, the owners, the primary personnel on that record. And any changes or modifications that need to be made to the ownership or the primary personnel can be requested through this new record type. And this new record type will then push all of those ownership primary personnel changes down to any application records or licenses that have been issued to that entity. So once this is up and running and the businesses have established their legal entity records and we've linked everything, folks will no longer have to submit modification requests for ownership or primary personnel changes on all of their DCR licensing records. They'll just have to submit it one time and pay one set of fees. And then once it's been processed, it'll be pushed to all of the linked records. One that will reduce fees that applicants and licensees are charged. And then also it will reduce the temporary approval application fees for applicants and licensees that submit more than one record, because we will no longer have to vet the organizational entity, the owners and the primary personnel for every subsequent application that gets submitted. We'll only have to make updates when a modification request is submitted to the department. We also have an e-payment solution that we hope to have online before the end of the year that will allow for folks to submit payments to DCR as soon as an invoice is generated, either through e-check or through a credit card. And then we're also working with the Excella and city planning teams to interface our licensing portal with the Geographic Information System, ArcGIS, that is used to host the various maps on DCR's website. If we are able to get everything interfaced, the maps will be updated more in real time, and different pushes for pending applications, requests, license locations will be pushed out more frequently than the monthly updates that we have been doing. We are abandoning applications, and we do have a new refiling system online that went online earlier this year. Approximately 700 social equity individual applicants have submitted eligibility verification requests. DCR is continuing to collect social equity individual applicant eligibility verification requests through Monday, July 25th, 2022 at 4 p.m. The deadline to submit a request is Monday, July 25th, 2022 at 4 p.m. Late requests will not be accepted. So for folks that are submitting eligibility verification requests, you do need to make sure that it gets submitted to DCR before the deadline. If you've started a request, but you have not submitted the request, that is not sufficient. It needs to be submitted. DCR does not have access to any information that you may have saved that has not been submitted for review. So we won't even be able to see it unless it does get submitted. For folks, you do have the ability to edit your submission up until the deadline. So if you have a partially completed submission, it may be in your best interest just to get it submitted. So something is before the department, even if you're waiting for documentation to finish it, so that you can go back in at a later date and just edit your prior submission so that we have access to that information. And with that, that concludes my opening remarks. So we can hop to the next slide and jump into the questions.
Great. The first question is from Jake G and Tamika D. How does an applicant go about reapplying after their application has been deemed abandoned for phase 3, round 1?
So temporary approval applications that are deemed abandoned under the municipal code after January 1st may be eligible for refiling. An application is subject to specific requirements articulated in the code. So if somebody is eligible to refile, they'll get a communication notifying them that the record has been deemed abandoned. When the owner or applicant logs into the DCR licensing portal, if they see under record status that it's marked eligible -refile, they have the ability to submit, to basically refile and submit a new pre-application record request. Folks have up to 1 year from the date that they're notified the record was abandoned to refile if it is eligible for refiling. The refiled application is not subject to a finding of undue concentration. These refiled applications are reviewed for compliance with the municipal code before an invoice is generated. So we do have to, one, determine whether or not the person requesting the refiling is associated with a user account that can initiate the refiling. And then, of course, for the documentation submitted as part of the pre-app process, we do have to verify whether or not it's consistent with the refiling requirements articulated in the code. So we will be invoicing a number of refiled applicants next week after we make the transition to the new workflow, which is really designed to facilitate people through a streamlined pre-application review and temporary approval application process.
Great. The next question is from Marshall B. I was approved a couple of years ago as a social equity individual applicant, but never did anything. How can I find out if I am still approved and what are my options?
So the list of social equity individual applicants verified under the 2019 eligibility criteria is available on DCR's website under the licensing section. And we can drop a link in the FAQ either later this week or next week, so that the person asking the question has the ability to jump right into the document. The municipal code outlines which activities are restricted to social equity individual applicants. And at the current time, DCR is not accepting applications for retail storefront or cultivation activities that include cultivating mature plants. So I would recommend you look at the licensing section of the website and see what application types are available for social equity individual applicants and verify that you are on the verified list from 2019. And then that will help drive what you're able to submit to the department at this time. If you request verification under the expanded criteria and you're verified under the expanded criteria, that would then possibly allow for you to apply for additional activities in the future.
The next question from Andrea H., Stephanie R., and Darwin B. Is there still grant money and fee waivers available for new applicants?
At this time, we do have grant monies available for social equity individual applicant eligibility verification request fee waivers. We have grant monies available for existing licensees to facilitate their transition from a temporary license to an annual license, but we don't have grant monies available to waive application fees for applicants that do not have temporary approval at this time.
Okay. The next question is from Taylor B. Related to the PCN process, what is the estimated time to get referred to the City Council from first requesting pre-application review? Are there any unadvertised holdups in the process?
So the department administered a public convenience and necessity pilot program, and that's what I will take as the PCN process. We are not currently accepting applications or pre-applications for commercial cannabis activities that would be subject to a finding of undue concentration, which would then ultimately require the prospective applicant to pursue a PCN finding. I do anticipate that the PCN process will open in late 2022.
From Edwin K. Can licenses relocate in the future with respect to retail?
Under the current municipal code, retail storefront licenses may be relocated to a compliant location within the existing community plan area the license was issued.
From Michelle G. What is an applicant to do if they cannot find a compliant retail location in their same or original community plan area?
Yeah, unfortunately, the municipal code does not currently give DCR the discretion to consider relocation requests that are submitted for a property in a different community plan area. DCR has recommended that the city council consider expanding it to allow for folks to relocate licenses to community plan areas that have not reached undue concentration. And I anticipate that the Planning and Land Use Management Committee may consider those recommendations sometime when the council returns from their summer recess.
From Nairuth B. Can you confirm how long it usually takes for vetting a new location and getting approved with a priority 2 status review being paid for?
So due to DCR's current vacancy rate, it is taking longer to process all service requests. Applicants and licensees who pay for expedited services, and the level 2 is part of the expedited services, are still getting processed faster than non-expedited service requests. Unfortunately, the location verification related services have been most impacted by DCR's recent attrition. And that is one of the areas that we're focusing on. So we only have one person who is qualified to do the vetting of location related information for modifications and other records. And they have to balance that with their existing caseload and other requirements. So those management assistants that I had mentioned in the opening remarks that we've made conditional job offers to, once they get onboarded, we'll have an opportunity to get them trained so that we have more capacity to process location related requests so that we can improve those processing timelines.
Next question from Sun Prince A. Do previous qualified social equity applicants need to requalify?
So it depends. If you were previously verified and you already have an existing record before the department, you don't have to get re-verified in order for that record to move forward. However, if you're planning to apply for activities in the future, you may have to get verified under the expanded criteria in order to participate. The code does require folks to be verified under the expanded criteria and have a qualifying cannabis related arrest or conviction to participate in the phase 3 retail round 2 lottery. And it is a prerequisite that they're verified and they meet the criteria under the expanded section and the round 2 section of the municipal code in order to register for the lottery. So it really just depends on your individual needs and what you plan to apply for or have applied for. I would recommend, if you believe you can be verified as a social equity individual applicant under the expanded criteria, that you get your eligibility verification request in by the deadline. And we do have fee waivers still available, so you would be able to do that at no upfront cost.
Okay, from Jesse F. How many applications have been submitted, and how many of those applications have cannabis convictions or arrests?
So I'm just going to assume that it's related to the eligibility verification request process. Approximately 700 eligibility verification requests have been submitted. We are not processing those requests until the submission window closes at 4 p.m. Pacific time on Monday, July 25th, 2022. At this time, I don't have a percentage of how many of the applications include a cannabis conviction or arrest because we haven't looked at them or started processing them yet.
The next question from Jason A. I would like to know more about the procedure for social equity applicants.
I would recommend visiting the department's website at cannabis.lacity.org for resources available. Resources on our website include videos, FAQs, checklist, and the various forms that you may need to submit as to participate as a social equity applicant. We also have information videos related to the eligibility verification process on our website under the social equity section.
From Rick H, is there going to be help locating a space for lease?
No, that is not a service DCR provides.
From Daniel F, how many round 2 applicants will be accepted?
At this time, DCR anticipates at least 125 social equity individual applicants will be selected to submit a phase 3 retail round 2 application.
From Lucia C, for the social equity individual applicant proof of residency, your website states a driver's license will qualify for the year it was issued. Will a California ID also be accepted? Say, for example, an ID of when I was a minor.
Yes, it will be accepted as proof of residency for the year it was issued.
Also from Lucia, for social equity individual applicant proof of residency, for when I was a minor, will a birth certificate and a utility bill in a guardian's name be enough? Or will a tax return also be necessary?
You know, without being able to see the documents, a birth certificate that shows a link between the person requesting verification and somebody listed on that birth certificate who is also listed on the utility bill will be sufficient to establish a link. If the person whose name is listed on the utility bill is not listed on the birth certificate, some other form of proof establishing a link will need to be provided.
Okay, from John, oh, go ahead.
As it relates to the tax return, if a tax return was submitted, it could serve 2 purposes. It could, 1, establish a link, and 2, to the extent that the tax return submitted, it shows the individual as a dependent of the taxpayer, and the address listed for that tax return is in a disproportionately impacted area, that document could also qualify as proof of evidence for the year the tax return was filed.
Okay, next question from John. For the asset attestation form, when it asks to specify the HUD income limit for 2020/2021, do you jot down the low income limit or the categorized limits for very low or extremely low?
That's a great question. So DCR uses the low income limit. So please just respond as it relates to the low income limit.
From Chris F, what is the purpose of making an applicant have a location before allowing them to apply for a license? It could be months of paying rent before the license is approved, and then they could be stuck with a lease without a license.
So DCR advocated and recommended an update to the municipal code to allow prospective applicants to go through the pre-application review process without having an executed lease or a property deed for the proposed business premises. So the code was updated back in July of 2020 to allow for folks to come into our process without having a secured location. All the person would have to do in order to initiate the pre-application review process would be to get an attestation from the landlord, which does not require an executed lease. So as it relates to our current process, we do not require somebody to come into the process with an executed lease. Folks would be able to negotiate the lease and execute it once they know whether or not the proposed location complies with the land use ordinance within the code. So, and if this question is related to the future phase 3 retail round 2 lottery process, folks will register for the lottery. Registration for the lottery is not going to require them to identify a proposed business premises location or a community plan area. If somebody is selected through the lottery, they'll be allowed 1 year from the date of that notification to complete the pre-application review process and identify a compliant location. And then of course, folks have 1 year from the date the pre-application review record is deemed eligible for further processing to submit a temporary approval application. So somebody could be selected for the lottery. They have 1 year to identify a compliant location and complete the pre-application review process, which does not require an executed lease. And then if the pre-application review record is deemed eligible for further processing, that individual would have an additional year to submit their temporary approval application. And of course, an executed lease would be a required document for a temporary approval application. So you will have time to execute the lease after you know whether or not you would be accepted into the process.
Okay, next question from Jesse F. Will a ratepayer letter from my cable TV company work for the residency requirement?
A letter from the cable company may work for the year it was issued. It would be best just to download a copy of your bill. And then if you've lived at that residence for multiple years, just give us a copy of your TV bill for each of the years that you seek to get verified for residency under.
Okay, next question from Tiffany W. Why did DCR make the next retail licensing round a lottery rather than accepting the next 100 applications in line from round 1? So many held properties for so long, it doesn't seem fair.
So without throwing anybody under the bus, the availability of opportunities to apply for retail storefront applications was split across 2 groups. And under the municipal code, the council had prioritized accepting applications from folks that had already secured locations, and they set aside a set of licenses or application opportunities for retail storefront licenses for folks that haven't identified properties, with the understanding that DCR was applying for grants and we were developing a business licensing and compliance program. And in order to give social equity individual applicants an opportunity to apply that may need additional resources and help to submit a complete application, it was important to make sure that those programs were stood up. So Dr. Brown, of course, was hired. She came on board, she filled out her team. She's been hustling and working with vendors and establishing BLC criteria and doing webinars and workshops and, establishing all kinds of things to support social equity applicants that are, pursuing a commercial cannabis license. And we're kind of at the point where we've stood all of that up and services have been available. And we're now administering the eligibility verification request process that's required by the code to initiate the round 2 lottery. So that was a policy decision that was previously made, and DCR stands behind that policy decision. And hopefully the resources that Dr. Brown and her team have developed will assist folks in being successful if they're eligible to submit a round 2 application.
Next question from Brandon D. Where would we look to find CEQA documentation to complete the licensing 4013 form?
So on the first page of the 4013 form, a lot of the information about community plan area, fire station, police station, etc., can be found in the city's zoning information map access system, which is also known as ZEMAS, which is, I believe, zemas.lecity.org. And if you just type in your location, it'll basically pull up data associated with that. And then on the left-hand side of the screen, there will be like different categories of information, and you can just expand those categories of information to get the information that you need to populate the first part of the form. As it relates to the rest of the form, those are really questions about that specific property. So like, is there anything unique about the property? What's surrounding the property? You know, where do you get your water from? You know, who do you use for waste management? Those kinds of questions are really going to be unique to the applicant. In most cases, people utilize the Department of Water and Power for water and electricity within the city. And then the Bureau of Sanitation, which is part of the Department of Public Works, handles all of the waste associated with it, either directly or through one of the various vendors that has a contract with the Bureau of Sanitation. So top part, grab it from ZEMAS. Other parts are really, you know, intended to be answered either by you, the applicant who knows about the property, or the property owner, or you may be able to gather information based on, you know, the various bills that you pay associated with the operation of that location. And I hope that helps.
Great. Next question from Cindy D. Can a phase 2 tier 3 licensed holder of cultivation, manufacturing, and distribution add a retail license or apply for the round 2 retail license or any other available retail licensing program if we are now in an area that is not listed as having undue concentration?
So the simple answer is no. A phase 2 tier 3 applicant is not a social equity applicant. A tier 3 applicant has not been verified under the 2019 eligibility criteria. So they didn't meet the requirements to participate in round 1. And then of course the code requires anybody who seeks to participate in round 2 to be verified under the expanded criteria. So if somebody's interested in registering for the lottery, which is a prerequisite to being selected, and then submitting a round 2 application, they do have to get verified under the expanded criteria, which is currently open. And DCR is not currently accepting applications for the retail storefront activity. So really the only option will be for folks to either be selected via the lottery and have the opportunity to apply, or when the PCN process reopens, have the opportunity to go through pre-app review and then seek a PCN finding. But again, you will have to be a verified social equity individual applicant to be eligible to submit an application for those commercial cannabis activity types.
Next question from Jermaine R. If you no longer have documentation regarding your conviction, but DCR has it via round 1, how do you get DCR to reapply that information for round 2?
So if you were previously verified in 2019, log into your Excella user account and go to your documents, and then re-download the evidence that you submitted to demonstrate your conviction. And once you've downloaded it, you'll be able to then go into the 2022 social equity individual applicant eligibility verification request form and then upload that document as your proof of a commercial cannabis related arrest or a conviction.
Okay, next question from Jana C. Can a phase 3 applicant sell 100% of their equity to anyone after January 1st, 2025?
So phase 3 is considered general licensing, which includes processing social equity applications as well as general applications. Social equity applications have to comply with Municipal Code Section 10420. And in order to comply with that, there does have to be a qualifying social equity individual applicant that's an owner and holds the requisite equity share. So if it's a social equity license, any modification request to change ownership will have to comply with the modification requirements as well as 10420. If it's a general license, it has to comply with the municipal code and the modification requirements. And a person who has been convicted of various offenses is not eligible to be an owner. So the simple answer to that very complex question is no. Regardless of what application or license type is, you can't just sell it to anybody. There's restrictions on who can be an owner of a commercial cannabis license within the city and at the state level that apply to all records. And there's additional requirements for social equity licenses, and they need to comply with 10420. So depending on your individual situation, you can't just sell to anybody. And depending on the license type will kind of drive what requirements need to be met in order for a modification request to get processed.
Okay, next question from Denise M. Is there an exclusive transport license available?
Prospective applicants are able to apply for a distributor transport only license, which if granted would allow that individual to transport cannabis between licensed businesses. For that specific type, generally people pursue it when the person transporting the cannabis is never going to be recognized as an owner of that cannabis. It's kind of like the Postal Service, UPS, FedEx, where they're picking up a package at location A and then they're transporting it to location B, but they don't own the contents of that package during its transportation. Hopefully that helps.
Thanks. The next question is from Alvaro W. Has the delivery pilot program rolled out?
The simple answer is yes. DCR has already completed the delivery pilot program. We've been accepting non-storefront delivery applications from verified social equity applicants since 2020.
Okay, also from Alvaro, when will the remaining social equity licenses be granted?
So this one's going to have a little caveat. So there are certain commercial cannabis activities, retail storefront, volatile manufacturing, and cultivation where you're growing and then you're taking care of mature plants. Those are license types that are subject to a finding of undue concentration, which means that DCR only has the authority to consider a specific number of applications and issue a specific number of licenses before an application would require the additional step of getting a public convenience or necessity finding from the city council. So undue concentration creates a soft cap for retail storefront, cultivation, and volatile manufacturing. And then the city council has the discretion to review a PCN request on a case-by-case basis to try to determine whether or not a supporting finding can be made. If a finding is made, then of course, DCR would have the authority to process the application, and if the applicant meets all of the requirements, issue a license. There's other activities such as non-storefront retail, which are delivery only license types, nursery, cultivation processor, distribution, transport only, testing, non-volatile manufacturing, and all of the different non-volatile manufacturing license types that fall under that umbrella, those are not subject to a finding of undue concentration, which means that there's not a limit on the number of applications DCR can consider or issue licenses for under the current code. So it really depends on which activity you're talking about. And there is a soft cap for how many applications and licenses DCR has the authority to kind of by right issue versus things that would then require the additional discretion of the city council.
Okay, next question from Michelle D. How do applicants proceed with applications approved for refiling after the fee has been paid?
So when an applicant refiles, they submit a new pre-application review record. Upon payment and a determination of eligibility, that record would be updated so that the applicant would have the ability to submit their temporary approval application and pay the corresponding temporary approval application fees. The process for a refiled application is the same as any other application that gets filed. Once we've reviewed the initial filing, determine that it meets the requirements for refiling, and we issue the invoice for that pre-application review fee on the new record.
Okay, next question from Nairuth B. Can you confirm how long it usually takes for the vetting of a new location and getting approved with a priority 2 status review being paid for?
I think we had an earlier question that was similar to this, but given our vacancy rate, it's taken us longer to process all service requests, and anything that requires vetting a location is taking longer. Unfortunately, we lost our subject matter expert who focused on that specific task, and we haven't been able to backfill the position yet. So requests that have been submitted and expedited services have been requested on that request are still getting processed either 25% or 50% faster than other similarly situated requests. But unfortunately, it is taking a lot longer than it was previously because of that attrition. And I apologize for it in advance. And we're doing our best to fill those vacant positions so we can get back up into a more appropriate processing time for location requests and location verification.
From Luis M. Is there a sample to follow for the security plan or the other plans that need to be presented to DCR?
I would defer to the state guidelines for the plans. Last year, as part of our processing and our streamlining of our application process and decoupling from the state's process, we no longer require security plans, staffing plans to be submitted as part of the temporary approval application process. We will not be requiring those plans as part of the city's annual application process. We will be looking for the applicant, well, at that point, there'll be a licensee to disclose the approved plans once a state annual license is issued and the state approves those plans. By and large, our code and rules and regulations really piggyback off of the state's regulatory scheme. And to the extent that the plans comply with the state's requirements, they're going to comply with our local requirements as it relates to staffing and security. So the short answer is, unless your analyst asks you for a copy of your security plan because they have questions about your premises diagram or the situation of cameras or other things that are applicable to the TA process, you don't have to worry about the plans and the submission of the plans until you've been issued your state annual license.
From Wes W. What is the plan on regulating or banning delivery from other cities to within the city of Los Angeles? City of Los Angeles operators are having a hard time competing against nearby cities with lower taxes delivering into the city of LA, undercutting the out-the-door price to consumers.
So under state law, a licensed delivery business is able to deliver into local jurisdictions, regardless of whether or not that local jurisdiction has a commercial cannabis regulatory structure. The businesses that are licensed outside of the city and deliver into the city are still required to register for a business tax registration certificate, as well as remit taxes associated with their activities for any sales that are made within the city. And you would have to reach out to the Office of Finance for more information, but there is a tax distribution scheme that they have with cities such as San Diego and San Francisco, where their licensees are delivering into the city and responsible for remitting taxes.
Okay, next question from Leheaven J. Can an applicant change the address location attached to his application if that location was not secured by the applicant's investors?
So unless a license has been issued, which would require the execution of a lease or proof of a property deed, the pre-application review is linked to a specific location. And once it's deemed eligible for further processing, the corresponding temporary approval application may only be submitted for that property. So if you are unable to get site control and secure the location, you will have to restart the pre-application review process. Either because your application gets deemed abandoned because you're unable to meet the temporary approval application requirements, or if you time out and are deemed abandoned and the record meets the requirements that allow for it to be refiled.
Okay, next question from Tanner B. Can you please update us on the efforts to shut down illegal shops?
So just a reminder for everybody, the Department of Cannabis Regulation does not have any purview over enforcement actions taken against unlicensed commercial cannabis businesses. We can only deal with businesses that are within our pipeline, applicants and licensees. DCR does verify whether or not licenses have been issued when the city agencies such as the LAPD, the city attorney, building and safety, DOT, fire, et cetera, are investigating unlicensed commercial cannabis activity. It's best to kind of reach out for them and then make sure that if you believe that there's unlicensed activity going on, it gets reported through the complaint portal, so those complaints can get routed to the appropriate agency.
Okay, next question from Sergio F. If one is in bankruptcy, can court documents be used to establish 10 years of residency and net worth?
I don't know. It really is going to depend on what is included in those court documents and whether or not it meets the criteria for the eligibility verification request process.
Okay, from Esther G. For social equity individual applicant verification, what does one do if they do not have any tax documents because they did not earn anything for 2021 and 2020?
So if somebody didn't earn enough to be required to file taxes in calendar years 2020 or 2021, you must request a verification of non-filing letter from the Internal Revenue Service. And you can request the letter online. And I know for sure there is a link in the FAQ as well as on the social equity page so that folks can get to that online form and request that document. And that will be your proof that you didn't have income sufficient to report it to the IRS.
Okay, next question from Yelena K and Stephanie R. When do you anticipate the CEQA consultant to begin reviewing the submitted license 4013 forms?
Sometime over the summer. To date, we are still collecting the 4013 forms, and we haven't collected sufficient numbers of those form yet for any of the community plan areas for the consultants to begin doing the work. To avoid being accused of piecemealing the review or the impacts, we are looking to bundle as many of those businesses pursuing licenses in that geographic area as possible, so that we could deal with any perceived cumulative impacts prior to getting the recommendations to move forward. I do hope to start seeing them, for them to start working on it sometime this summer. And then hopefully within the fall, we'll start to get the first round of results from the consultants.
Okay, the next question from Caleb P. What is the responsibility of your department?
In short, DCR is responsible for administering the commercial cannabis licensing and regulatory program established by the Los Angeles City Council. Specifically, we process applications for commercial cannabis licenses within the city. We make licensing decisions and/or licensing recommendations to the Cannabis Regulation Commission, or the City Council. We have no authority to deal with unlicensed commercial cannabis activity within the city.
Question from Lisa S. What if someone was arrested for possession of cannabis, but also cocaine in the same arrest? Will that disqualify you?
It may be sufficient to demonstrate that you meet the criteria to be verified as a social equity individual applicant. And then ultimately, if you do submit an application, other arrest and conviction related information on your criminal history may preclude you from being an owner of a commercial cannabis license, which would then either result in your application being deemed ineligible or denied.
From Karina S. Will an LADWP service confirmation letter stating that we have had service for more than 10 years suffice? How would I upload that in Excella? Would I have to upload the same document over and over for each year?
A DWP service confirmation letter that shows when service began and when it ended, or if it's currently still being provided, is sufficient to meet the requirements for whatever period is covered in the letter. Those documents are not uploaded through Excella. They have to be uploaded as part of the eligibility request verification request submission. You don't have to upload that letter multiple times. You can upload it once, but when you are filling out your eligibility verification request form, when it's asking you for year one, what document you're using and what year does it cover, you do need to complete that, but you only have to upload one copy of the DWP letter.
From DC, can you pay for a license to make the process faster?
Some of the updates that we're going to be rolling out this summer, beginning with this weekend, would allow for people to get their entity vetted before an application gets submitted and pay corresponding fees, which will expedite the processing of future applications. And I'll share more on that at a later date.
From Karina S. Will someone who got a cannabis conviction in Sacramento be able to apply? Do they have to be a resident of Los Angeles to be considered eligible?
Any arrest or conviction which happened in the state of California may qualify. You do not have to be a resident of the city of Los Angeles to request verification.
Okay, from Kayan B. If you don't have 10 years living in a DCR qualified area, what other ways can we qualify as a social equity applicant?
There are three criteria. One is residency. The other is low income for calendar year 2020 or 2021. And then the third is to demonstrate that you have a cannabis-related arrest or a conviction, which occurred in the state of California.
Okay, another question from Cayenne. Does DCR have a staff or customer service number we can call to assist us with the social equity verification requests?
You can email questions to dcrsep@lacity.org, or you can call our general number 213-978-0738 during business hours.
Okay. A question from Maurice C. If a group of 4 individuals band together to form an LLC with one of them being a tier 1 social equity applicant, would the social equity applicant impart the tier 1 status to the LLC, or would the tier 1 status remain with the individual?
An individual's verification is tied to the individual. In order for the entity to be recognized as a social equity applicant or licensee, they have to have a social equity individual applicant that's been verified, listed as an owner with the requisite equity required under 10420 for the entity to be considered social equity. But if the owner leaves and it's not replaced with another owner that meets the criteria, it would no longer be considered social equity.
Okay, from Chris P. The licensed 4006 form revised on April 11th, 2022 states in the instructions that notarized signatures are required, but the form on the website does not have a page for notarization. DCR analysts have stated previously that if a form no longer contains a page for notarization, it is not required. How should we complete this form?
The advice that the analysts have been giving is correct. I will take a look at the 4006 form to look at the instructions. If the notarization pages have been removed from the form, we are no longer requiring notarization for those forms. So please submit the form as it exists on the website. And if it doesn't have a notarization page, a notarized signatures are not required at this time, and we'll get those instructions updated.
Okay, last question from Julia S. What does the city charge for self-distribution?
I would refer them to Municipal Code Section 10419, which lists the applicable DCR fees. And if you have questions about the tax rates, I recommend you reach out to the Office of Finance.
Thanks, Jason. That was our last question.
Thank you. Just before we close out, I do want to let folks know that we're going to be sending out a few communications later today and tomorrow regarding updates to the DCR licensing portal, the DCR licensing portal being down for maintenance over the weekend. We do intend to bring it up sometime on Monday once we've had an opportunity to verify the migration and that the new records are functioning as anticipated in the production environment. We will be sending out a reminder notification for the social equity individual applicant eligibility verification process, reminding folks that there's only a few, there's less than 2 weeks left. The process will close at 4 p.m. on July 25th, 2022. We will be providing an update to the Cannabis Regulation Commission. I believe our next meeting is next Thursday as it relates to changes to the process, how the system maintenance and the updates have been rolled out, what are the numbers for social equity verification requests submitted, current licensing data. So if you're interested in getting an update on any of those numbers or how things have went over the weekend, please tune into next week's commission meeting because I will be providing an update. And I just want to thank everybody for coming, and I look forward to the next Q&A session. So everybody have a great day. Thank you.